hands be an extension of Christ, and our mouths speak the words of him we love. Amen. Today we celebrate the feast of Mary Magdalene. In 2016, Pope Francis did an extraordinary thing. He turned her Saints' Day into a feast day, making her equal to the 12 apostles. For the Roman Catholic Church, who had maligned her for centuries, this was an extraordinary turnabout, and one that pleases my heart tremendously. Because I think by saying, hailing Mary Magdalene, he set her as an example and as a model for all women in the church. And she never had that privilege or role. The focus had always been on Mary, the mother of Jesus. And she had been labeled a prostitute, for which there is no foundation. But this is what happened. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory, known as Gregory the Great, read 4 stories about 4 women who anointed Jesus. The first story in Mark, and the second story in Matthew, refer to an unnamed woman who anointed Jesus' head and by her actions said, "This is the anointed one. This is the Messiah." The third story was in Luke, and it described Mary of Bethany, Martha's sister, who anointed his feet. And the fourth story was in John, where a repentant woman, I may have Luke and John mixed up, but that's okay. A repentant woman who was so thankful, so full of gratitude for being forgiven, that she found Jesus at a dinner, men only, and she wept on his feet, dried them with her hair, and then anointed them. Pope Gregory, in his lack of wisdom, put all 4 women together and said they were Mary Magdalene, a repentant sinner. And then because Luke had said that she had been healed of 7 demons, he said those were the 7 deadly sins. See how the story got screwed up? So for those of us who have always believed that she was a remarkable companion and devotee of Jesus, this is big news. This is finally bringing her out into the light of day for all that she was, a woman who believed in him, listened to him, followed him, stood by him till the very end, and then was the first to see him when he was resurrected. I think she's the feminist figure that the Me Too era is looking for in the Bible. I think her faith and commitment to Jesus led her to companion him throughout his ministry, and eventually to the cross and the tomb. And what she did afterwards was to tell people about her experience of him. And that's the message for us, to tell people about our experience of God and of Jesus whenever we can. So Pope Francis, in essence, for the last 2 years, has been telling all women to become gutsy like her. Now, she has been forever acclaimed the apostle to the apostles in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and you may have heard that over time. But now, she is the apostle to the apostles in all the churches, so that we can all recognize her. Now, she's been my companion ever since 1986 when I started seminary, and I was invited to write 5 meditations on saints of the early church, first 500 years. And I said to Guy Lytle, who was teaching the class, is it okay if I do all women? And he said, "Oh, sure, Bonnie." And then he said, on reflection, I'm not sure I can think of 5 women that would qualify. Ooh. That set off my little feminist heart. It hadn't been born yet, but it sure got born that day. One of the things I discovered in learning about the 5 women that I chose for my meditations is that Elizabeth Moltmann Wendell, a German theologian, had written a book called The Women Around Jesus. And it was published in 1990 before I was ordained. And I've just recently reissued my book, The Women Who Knew Jesus, and I've dedicated it to Elizabeth, who died last year before she got to see my book. Now, because of what Pope Gregory said about Mary Magdalene, if you look for pictures of her, all of them have flowing hair and a voluptuous, sexy body. It's hard to find a picture that's just a nice woman talking to Jesus, which would be an accurate picture of their relationship. Now, many scholars today think that it was Mary Magdalene who anointed Jesus, that she was the unnamed woman in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. And that makes sense because she knew him well enough to know that he was going to die. And she had a ministry of anointing that she shared with him. We know those parts of history. So she was able, by anointing his head, to say to everyone, "This is the anointed one." I think she's finally been reclaimed for who she really was. And it's the final step in naming her to be the apostle to the apostles, a title she's always had but never had within the Western Church. And now we can claim her relationship with Jesus and her commitment to his ministry. And I'm going to try to spearhead a movement in the Episcopal Church to have the 22nd of July, although the Romans now celebrate the 22nd of June, the 22nd of July, which has always been her feast day, to be a Sunday in our lectionary. And I learned something very significant when I've been studying Mary Magdalene and preaching about her every year on the 22nd of July in whatever Episcopal church will invite me. In the 28th, and 79th Book of Common Prayer, you will only find 4 Gospels that talk about women. Mary and Martha, Mary the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene on Easter. In 1992, after Vatican II in 65 reclaimed the honor of Mary Magdalene and disclaimed the false impression from Gregory the Great, they moved towards a revised common lectionary which all the major churches now follow. And what I discovered in looking at the old and now looking at the revised common lectionary is that all but 3 of my stories in my book, Women Who Knew Jesus, are now included on Sundays. And you'll hear most of them next year, because it's year C, and that's the year of the woman. And I'll go run around the diocese like I did 2-3 years ago and preach each Sunday that there's a woman's story. So, forever, whenever people talked about Jesus' disciples, they referred to 12 men. But disciple means learner. And so it referred to all the men and women that Jesus taught and who found his teachings worthy. And all the Gospels tell us that when Jesus died on the cross, Mary Magdalene and some of the other women who had followed him from Galilee were present at the cross, being there with him while he died. And then they tell that the women followed the body to the cave and stayed and returned at dawn to be able to bury it after the Sabbath. They all four say that. You know, I don't know about you, but I have been witness to people who have died. It's something that a priest gets to do often, and it's a privilege. It's a sacred moment. And if you have been present at the death of someone you love, you'll know how Mary Magdalene felt that day. You'll also understand her elation when Jesus caused her to recognize him and she saw the fulfillment of the promise. This revered man whom she had known and followed was now the promised one who came again. Jesus gave her the task of proclaiming his resurrection to the others. I don't think he was surprised to find her there at the tomb, because if you think about it, she had anointed him before the crucifixion. She had been present at the crucifixion, and she was there to receive him at the tomb as the first person to meet him. Her story is really a faith story. And what she did, we can do. We can tell other people about our experiences of encountering God or Jesus and help them realize that our faith has substance because of our experience. What's special about her is that she spoke her truth with confidence, with integrity, and she can become a model for all of us to tell our stories. Now, one thing you need to do is abandon the picture you have of Mary Magdalene that you got from Jesus Christ Superstar. Beautiful song, not the right story. Or from Da Vinci Code. They both sexualize her. That's not the issue. The issue is she was a constant companion. And there are non-canonical gospels, which I'm beginning to try to decipher and understand, that have been found throughout the Middle East. And in those, she talks about her encounters with Christ after he died and the conversations they had that the men were not privy to. It's really quite special. So, since the Vatican has called her a model and example for all women in the church, I'm going to make it larger and say she's a model and example for all Christians. We can all tell our stories. We all need role models. I lacked a female role model. I didn't see women ushers growing up in the church. I didn't see women priests. I didn't see women vestry members. And there have been people here at 7:30 who said, me too, me too. You know, if you're old enough, women were seen but not heard, seen and not heard. And sometimes not even seen. They were back in the altar guild. So this is what we can do. We can listen to Jesus. We can witness to his extraordinary teachings and his extraordinary acts of healing. We can be valued by him as she was and value him in return. And we can witness to what we know and tell others about it. Jesus invites us into the same kind of relationship he had with Mary Magdalene. She has been my companion in ministry since 1986. And it was in 1986 when I started seminary that Steve McWhirter was your rector. And I came here as we were all told to go visit churches, to see where we would go for field day. And I was so enamored with the fact that he could preach without notes that I wanted to come here. And then he announced his resignation, so I had to go to St. John's. But it's wonderful to be back in this space. Like Mary Magdalene, we all have stories to tell. And I hope you feel inspired to tell yours. That's the only way that our faith will be spread. And that's really why I wrote my book, Women Who Knew Jesus. I was going to bring a whole pile of them today, but it's just 1 week away from being off the press. There's a new edition coming out with better pictures, a wonderful picture of Mary Magdalene and Jesus on the front, and the Samaritan woman, excuse me, and Jesus on the front. And so you're just going to have to wait, and I'll let Jeff know when it's out. Skipping ahead. So, I'm just going to say, hear Jesus calling you now, just the way he called Mary, and invite you to share your experiences with him, with all that you meet. Amen.